She hid in his closet to muffle the sobs. He opened the door and found more than just tears. The city's most feared mafia boss just declared war over his secretary's stolen sister. Tonight, you'll witness a sealed deal, a savage fight in an underground arena, and a gunshot that changed everything. What happens when a ruthless kingpin discovers the one person he's been secretly protecting is breaking down in his private sanctuary? Stay with me because this story ends with a verdict no one expected. But before we dive into this intense story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because what you're about to witness is a mafia boss breaking every rule in his playbook for one woman. Trust me, you don't want to miss how a hidden moment in a closet triggers an all-out war. Now, let's get into it. Cheryl Taylor had one rule: keep her personal life separate from her professional one. For 18 months, she'd been the perfect secretary to Scott Elliott, managing schedules, filtering threats, maintaining the precise balance of power that kept his criminal empire running. She was invisible when she needed to be, indispensable always, and never ever showed weakness. Until the night her 22-year-old sister Emma was kidnapped. When Cheryl received the video, Emma bound, terrified, pleading she didn't go to the police. She couldn't. The kidnappers were clear. $500,000 in 72 hours, or Emma dies. No cops, no interference, just money her late father's gambling debts had guaranteed she didn't have. So Cheryl did the only thing she could think of. She went to work, tried to function, tried to think of a solution that didn't exist. And when the weight became too much, when the perfect facade finally cracked, she hid in the one place she thought was safe: Scott Elliott's private closet. She never expected him to find her. She definitely never expected what happened next. Because when the most dangerous man in the city discovered his secretary crying in the dark, surrounded by his expensive suits and the scent of his cologne, something shifted. Something primal and possessive and absolutely terrifying awakened in Scott Elliott. And what he did next would reshape the entire criminal underworld, all because one woman's tears triggered a war no one saw coming. Cheryl Taylor had exactly 47 seconds before she completely fell apart. She counted them while walking down the hallway past the conference room, where Scott Elliott's lieutenants were finalizing a shipping route, past the security checkpoint where armed men nodded at her with respect, past the portraits of Scott's deceased predecessors who'd built this empire on blood and silence. 47 seconds to find somewhere private. Somewhere no one would see the perfect, composed secretary crumble. The panic attack had been building for hours since the video arrived at 3:47 a.m., showing Emma bound to a chair, mascara running down her face, begging for help while a distorted voice listed demands: $500,000. 72 hours. No police, no tricks, or Emma dies. Cheryl had been functioning on autopilot all day, managing Scott's schedule, screening his calls, maintaining the facade of normalcy that her job required. But now, at 11:23 p.m., alone on the executive floor while Scott finished a meeting 3 floors down, the facade was cracking. She needed somewhere. Anywhere. Scott's private office was empty, dark except for city lights filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. Her keycard gave her access. She was one of only 3 people in the organization who could enter this space unsupervised. The closet. It was absurd hiding in her boss's walk-in closet like a scared child, but it was private, dark, and no one would think to look there. Cheryl slipped inside, closing the door behind her. The scent of expensive cologne and Italian wool surrounded her. Rows of perfectly tailored suits hung like silent witnesses. The space was larger than her first apartment, lit by a single motion sensor that clicked on when she entered. She pressed her back against the wall, slid down to the floor, and finally let herself break. The sobs came hard and ugly, the kind that steal breath and break composure. She pressed her hands over her mouth, trying to muffle the sound, but the grief and terror poured out anyway. Emma, her baby sister, the only family she had left after their father drank himself to death and their mother abandoned them both. 22 years old, just finishing college, her whole life ahead of her. And Cheryl had $8,000 in savings in 72 hours to find $492,000 more, or watch her sister die. The math didn't work. There was no solution, no way forward. Cheryl pressed her face against her knees and cried harder. She didn't hear the door open, didn't hear the footsteps, didn't sense anything until a voice deep, calm, dangerous spoke from directly above her. Cheryl. Her head snapped up. Scott Elliott stood in the closet doorway, silhouetted by the office lights behind him. 6'3" of controlled violence wrapped in a three-piece suit. Dark hair, darker eyes. A face that could have been handsome if it weren't for the scar running from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, courtesy of a rival's knife when he was 24. He was the most dangerous man in the city, and she was crying on his closet floor. Mr. Elliott, I'm sorry. I shouldn't be here. I was just... Cheryl scrambled to stand, wiping desperately at her face. Don't. His voice was quiet, but absolute. He stepped into the closet, and the motion sensor brightened, revealing his expression. Not angry. Not cold. Something else entirely, something that looked almost like concern. Don't apologize. Tell me what's wrong. It's nothing. I just needed a moment. Cheryl. He was closer now. Close enough that she could see his eyes tracking the tears on her face. The way her hands trembled. You've worked for me for 18 months. I've never seen you cry. Not when Vincent threatened you. Not when the Romano family tried to buy you out from under me. Not even when you found out your father died. So whatever is making you cry in my closet at 11:30 at night is not nothing. The gentleness in his voice cracked something inside her. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was desperation. But Cheryl found herself talking. My sister, Emma. She was taken, kidnapped this morning. They sent me a video. Scott went very, very still. Who took her? I don't know. They used voice distortion. They want $500,000 in 72 hours or they'll kill her. Cheryl's voice broke. I have $8,000, Mr. Elliott. I can't. There's no way I can. Show me the video. With shaking hands, Cheryl pulled out her phone and queued up the file. Scott watched it once in silence. Then again, his jaw tightening with each second. When it finished, he looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. Why didn't you come to me immediately? Because she's my problem. My sister. My responsibility. No. Scott's voice hardened. You are my responsibility. Which makes your sister my responsibility. Do you understand? Cheryl stared at him, confused. I don't understand. Scott stepped closer. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. I'm going to tell you something. I probably shouldn't. I've had men watching your apartment for 6 months. Making sure you get home safe. Vetting anyone who gets too close to you. Ensuring your safety without your knowledge. Cheryl's breath caught. What? Why? Because from the moment you walked into my office for your interview, I knew you were mine to protect. His hand came up, his thumb brushing away a tear on her cheek with surprising gentleness. You just didn't know it yet. The air in the closet felt electric, charged with something Cheryl couldn't name. Your sister will be home within 3 days, Scott continued, his tone shifting to something cold and final, the voice he used when declaring war. You have my word. He pulled out his phone. Dialed. Leo. My office. Now. We have a situation. Okay, can we pause for a second? Because if your boss responded to you crying by confessing he's had you under secret surveillance for 6 months, that's either the most romantic or most concerning thing ever depending on context. And honestly, I'm not sure which this is yet. But you better smash that subscribe button because we're about to find out how a mafia boss wages war over a secretary's sister. Also, comment. Would you tell your scary boss about a personal crisis? Or would you handle it alone? Let me know. Now, back to Scott. Making very intense promises. Within 20 minutes, Scott's private office had transformed into a war room. Leo Brennan, Scott's second in command, spread maps across the conference table. Satellite imagery. Property records. Known associates of criminal organizations that operated in debt collection and kidnapping. Talk to me, Scott said, his earlier gentleness replaced by lethal focus. Leo pulled up an image on the large monitor. Voice distortion is standard, but the background audio in the ransom video has specific markers. Industrial HVAC system, probable warehouse district, cross-referencing with recent activity. There's been chatter about Viktor Kozlov expanding his operations into collections. Scott's expression darkened. Kozlov, you know him? Cheryl asked quietly from her position at the edge of the room. Scott had insisted she stay, said she had a right to know what was happening. Viktor Kozlov runs enforcement for the Kozlov family, Leo explained. They're mid-tier warehouse operations, protection rackets, loan sharking. They've been pushing into territories we consider ours. This could be about leverage. They took my sister for leverage? Cheryl's voice rose. Scott turned to her. They took your sister to get to me. Through you. Which means they just made the biggest mistake of their miserable lives. He pulled out his phone again, dialed a number. When it connected, his voice was ice. This is Scott Elliott. I need a sit down with Viktor Kozlov. Neutral territory. Tomorrow, 8 p.m. Tell him if he's smart, he'll show up. He ended the call and looked at Leo. Find every property Kozlov owns or operates out of. I want surveillance on all of them. If Emma Taylor is moved, I want to know within 60 seconds. On it. As Leo left to coordinate, Scott walked to where Cheryl stood by the windows, looking out at the glittering city that suddenly felt like enemy territory. You should go home, he said quietly. Get some rest. I can't rest, not while Emma is. Then stay here. It wasn't a request. Guest room down the hall. I'll have someone bring your things. You're not leaving this building until she's safe. Cheryl turned to face him. Mr. Elliott, I appreciate everything you're doing, but you don't have to. Scott. What? Call me Scott. We're past formalities now. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. And I'm not doing this because I have to. I'm doing it because someone tried to hurt you by taking your sister. That's unforgivable. And I don't forgive. The restaurant was called Castellanos, an upscale Italian place downtown that served as neutral ground for underworld negotiations. It was owned by the Castellano family, who'd maintained strict neutrality for 3 generations. Violence here meant war with everyone. Scott arrived at 7:55 p.m. with Leo and 4 security personnel. Cheryl was with them despite Scott's initial protest. She'd insisted on being present. She's my sister, Cheryl had said firmly. I'm not sitting in a penthouse while you negotiate for her life. Scott had studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Stay behind me. If things go wrong, Leo gets you out. Non-negotiable. Now, sitting in the private dining room, Cheryl watched Scott's face as Viktor Kozlov entered. Viktor was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, built like a boxer, with blonde hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He had 3 men with him, all armed. Scott Elliott, Viktor said, his accent Russian but faint. I'm flattered you wanted to meet. Sit down, Viktor. Viktor sat, his men positioning themselves around the room. The tension was thick enough to cut. I believe you have something that belongs to me, Scott said calmly. Do I? Viktor's smile widened. I have many things, Scott. You'll have to be more specific. Emma Taylor, 22 years old, taken from her apartment 36 hours ago. Ring any bells? Viktor leaned back, pretending to think. Ah, yes. The college girl. Pretty thing. She owes us money, her father's debts. We're simply collecting. Her father is dead. His debts died with him. That's not how we do business. Viktor's eyes flicked to Cheryl. Besides, we've offered a very reasonable repayment plan. $500,000. Very affordable. Release her, Scott said flatly. Now, before this becomes a problem. Viktor laughed. A problem for who? You? Scott, you've gotten soft. Running your empire from behind a desk. Letting your pretty secretary make your appointments. He leaned forward. Here's my counteroffer. $2 million. Control of your waterfront shipping routes. And, his eyes locked on Cheryl. One evening with your beautiful secretary here, as collateral, to ensure good faith. The room went silent. Cheryl felt her blood run cold. Scott's men reached for their weapons, but Scott held up a hand. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. Say that again. You heard me. 2 million. The routes. And her. Viktor gestured dismissively at Cheryl. One night. I'll even return her in good condition. Mostly. Scott stood slowly. Every man in the room tensed. Victor, I'm going to give you an opportunity to walk this back. Right now. Because what you just proposed crosses a line you don't want to cross. Or what? Victor stood too, challenging. You'll start a war over a secretary? Everyone knows you've gone soft, Scott. The old you would have. Trial by combat. The words cut through the room like a blade. Victor blinked. What? You heard me. Trial by combat. Ancient rules. One-on-one, witnessed by neutral parties. Winner takes all, the girl goes free. And you forget you ever heard the name Emma Taylor. Leo leaned over, whispering urgently. Boss. Are you sure? I'm sure. Victor looked delighted. You want to fight me? Personally? Unless you're too scared to accept. The challenge hung in the air. Victor's men shifted uncomfortably. Refusing a formal challenge was a sign of weakness in their world. Fine, Victor said finally. Tomorrow night. Warehouse District, Old Branson facility. Neutral witnesses. But when I win, I'm taking your routes, your money, and your secretary. Deal? When you lose, Scott replied calmly, you're going to crawl back to whatever hole you came from and pray I don't hunt you down for touching what's mine. All right. Real talk. Scott just challenged a trained enforcer to hand-to-hand combat to save Emma. Is this the most romantic thing ever? Or is this man about to get himself killed? Drop your vote in the comments. Team Scott wins or Team This was a terrible idea. And if you haven't subscribed yet, seriously, we're about to get into an underground death match. You don't want to miss this. Okay, let's see what happens next. The drive back to Scott's building was silent. Cheryl sat in the back of the armored SUV, her mind racing. Leo drove, periodically glancing in the rearview mirror at Scott's expression, completely unreadable. When they arrived at the penthouse, Scott dismissed his men. I need the room. Leo hesitated. Boss? We should strategize. I said I need the room. When they were finally alone, Cheryl turned on him. What the hell were you thinking? Scott poured himself a drink whiskey, neat, and downed it in one swallow. I was thinking that man threatened you. Publicly. In front of witnesses. If I'd done nothing, it would have been seen as weakness. So this is about your reputation. This is about making it clear that you are under my protection. Scott's voice rose for the first time, his control slipping. Do you understand what would have happened if I'd walked away from that table? Every low-level enforcer in this city would have seen you as fair game. They would have come after you to get to me. Cheryl stared at him, her heart pounding. Why do you care so much? Because you're mine. The words hung between them raw, possessive, undeniable. Scott set down his glass, ran a hand through his hair. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but no less intense. I've been obsessed with you since the day you walked into my office for your interview. You wore a navy suit, carried a leather portfolio, and looked me directly in the eye when everyone else was too scared to make eye contact. You answered my questions with intelligence and competence, and you didn't flinch when I told you what this job actually entailed. He walked toward her slowly. I hired you because you were perfect for the position. But I kept you close because I couldn't stand the thought of you being anywhere I couldn't see you, couldn't protect you. I told myself it was just attraction, that it would fade. But it didn't. It got worse. And when I saw you crying in my closet, terrified for your sister, his hand came up, cupping her face with surprising gentleness. I would have declared war on the entire underworld if that's what it took to make you safe again. Cheryl's breath caught. Scott, I'm going to win tomorrow, he said firmly. Victor Kozlov is good, but he's not better than me. I didn't build this empire by being weak. I built it by being willing to do whatever it takes. And tomorrow, what it takes is beating him until he can't stand up. What if you lose? I won't. But what if you do? Cheryl's voice broke. What if he kills you? Then Leo will extract your sister anyway, and you'll be protected by the organization. I've already made arrangements. That's not what Cheryl stopped, frustrated. I don't want arrangements. I don't want contingencies. I want you to not get yourself killed over me. Scott smiled slightly. Too late. I was gone the moment I saw you. Cheryl didn't remember moving, but suddenly she was in his arms, her hands fisting in his shirt. If you win. When I win. When you win, she corrected, looking up at him. I'm yours. You said it yourself. So if you're going to claim me, you better survive to do it. Scott's eyes darkened. Cheryl. She kissed him. It was desperate, fierce, born of fear and attraction, and the sudden understanding that tomorrow might be the last chance they had. Scott responded immediately, his arms wrapping around her, lifting her off the ground as he walked them backwards toward the couch. Are you sure? He murmured against her lips. I've never been more sure of anything. What happened next was intense, consuming two people who'd been circling each other for 18 months, finally crashing together without barriers or pretense. Clothes were shed. Boundaries were crossed. And somewhere between the couch and the bedroom, Cheryl whispered the words that sealed her fate. I'm yours. Scott's response was absolute. Always. Morning came too quickly. Cheryl woke in Scott's bed, surrounded by dark sheets and the scent of his cologne. For one blissful moment, she forgot everything: Emma, Victor, the fight. Then Scott's phone buzzed, and reality crashed back. He answered, listened, said, I'll be down in 20, and hung up. Training? Cheryl asked quietly. Yeah, Leo's got the gym set up. He turned to look at her, his expression softening. You don't have to watch this part. I want to. Scott studied her for a moment, then nodded. Get dressed. It won't be pretty. The gym was on the building's sublevel, a space usually reserved for security training. Now it held Scott, Leo, and 3 of their best fighters. Cheryl watched from a raised observation platform as Scott stripped down to athletic pants and wrapped his hands. His torso was a map of scars, knife wounds, bullet grazes, the physical history of a man who'd fought his way to power. Come at me, Scott told his men. All of you, don't hold back. What followed was brutal. 3 trained fighters attacking simultaneously, and Scott met them with calculated violence. He wasn't flashy, no unnecessary movements, no wasted energy, just efficient, devastating precision. Joints were targeted. Balance was exploited. Within minutes, all 3 were on the mat, groaning. Again, Scott ordered. They went 5 rounds. By the end, Scott was bleeding from a split lip and his ribs were bruised, but he was still standing. Enough, Leo called. You're in fighting shape, boss. Save it for tonight. As his men filed out, Cheryl descended from the platform. Scott was drinking water, his chest heaving. You're really good at that, she said quietly. I have to be. This world doesn't respect weakness. He wiped blood from his lip. Before I took over this organization, I fought in underground rings to earn respect. 73 fights. 73 wins. Victor has maybe 30 fights to his name. I'm not worried about the fight itself. Then what are you worried about? Scott looked at her. That he'll cheat. That his men will interfere. That something will go wrong and you'll be in danger. He pulled her close. Despite being sweaty and bloody, promise me something. If things go wrong tonight, you'll let Leo get you out. Don't try to be a hero. Just survive. Cheryl pressed her face against his chest. Only if you promise to win. Deal. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Leo coordinated logistics. Security teams were briefed. Medical personnel were placed on standby. The neutral witnesses' representatives from Italian, Irish, and Chinese crime families confirmed their attendance. At 6 p.m., Scott sat Cheryl down in his office. I need you to understand something, he said seriously. After tonight, everything changes. If I win, you're not just my secretary anymore. You're under my protection permanently, which means you become a target. People will try to use you against me. Your life will never be completely safe again. My life hasn't been safe since I started working for you. This is different. This is public claiming. This is me announcing to the entire underworld that you belong to me. There's no going back from that. Cheryl met his eyes. I don't want to go back. Scott searched her face, then pulled a box from his desk drawer. Inside was a necklace, delicate gold chain, small diamond pendant. Simple but unmistakably expensive. Wear this tonight, he said, fastening it around her neck. It's got a tracker and a panic button. If something happens, press it and my men will come for you immediately. Cheryl touched the pendant. Scott, I need to know you're protected, even if I'm not there to do it myself. His hands framed her face. "You're the most important thing in my world, Cheryl. I need you safe." She kissed him soft, gentle, a promise. Then when? The Branson warehouse had been abandoned for years, but tonight it was packed. The center had been cleared and marked off into a fighting ring 30 feet square, surrounded by floodlights. Neutral observers occupied a raised platform. Don Castellano, Irish boss Connor O'Brien, and Chinese triad leader Wei Zhang. Their presence guaranteed the rules would be enforced. The crowd was a who's who of the criminal underworld, capos, enforcers, lieutenants. Everyone wanted to witness this. Cheryl sat in a secured observation area with Leo and 4 security personnel. She wore the necklace Scott had given her, along with a simple black dress. Her heart hammered against her ribs. At 8:47 p.m., Victor entered from the east entrance. He was shirtless, showing off a heavily muscled physique. His men cheered. He raised his arms, playing to the crowd. Scott entered from the west at 8:50 p.m. exactly. No showboating, no ceremony. He simply walked to his corner, stripped off his shirt, and waited. The neutral arbiter Don Castellano stood at the center of the ring. "Rules are simple," he announced, his voice carrying through the warehouse. "Hand-to-hand combat only, no weapons. Fight continues until one man submits, is unable to continue, or dies. Outside interference results in immediate disqualification and consequences." He looked at both fighters. "Gentlemen, this is a sanctioned trial by combat. Honor your word." Both men nodded. The bell rang. Victor moved first, fast and aggressive, trying to overwhelm with power. Scott absorbed the first few strikes, reading Victor's rhythm, looking for patterns. Then Scott counterattacked. The fight was savage. No rules against dirty fighting meant both men targeted vulnerable areas, joints, kidneys, throat. Blood sprayed. The crowd roared. Cheryl couldn't look away, even when she wanted to. Every time Victor landed a solid hit, her stomach twisted. Every time Scott countered, relief flooded through her. 3 minutes in, Victor went for a takedown. Scott sprawled, reversed, ended up on top. Ground strikes followed, brutal, methodical. Victor managed to roll free, blood streaming from his nose. They circled each other, breathing hard. "You're better than I expected," Victor admitted. "And you're exactly as mediocre as I thought." Victor snarled and charged again. "Okay, I need everyone to take a breath because I am stressed. If you're watching a Mafia boss fight for his secretary's sister's life and you're not subscribed, I don't understand your life choices. Hit that button right now because we're about to get into the most intense part of this story. And I need to know you're all coming with me on this journey. Also, comment, Team Scott or Team Victor? Let me know." Okay, back to the bloodbath. The fight. 10 minutes into the fight, both men were battered but standing. Scott had taken damage, his left eye was swelling shut. His ribs were bruised from a vicious body kick, and blood ran from a cut above his eyebrow. But Victor looked worse. His nose was broken. 3 of his ribs were likely cracked, and his left knee was compromised from a targeted strike. They were in the center of the ring, trading strikes, when Cheryl's phone buzzed. She glanced down. A text from an unknown number. "Look at the attached video. Your boss is about to die either way." With trembling hands, Cheryl opened the attachment. The video showed Emma still bound, still captive, but in a different location. 3 armed men stood around her. A timestamp in the corner read, "Live feed." Then a new text. "Kozlov's insurance policy. Girl dies regardless of fight outcome. Your boyfriend's about to learn that honor means nothing." Cheryl's blood ran cold. "Leo," she whispered urgently. He leaned over. "What?" She showed him the video. His face went hard. Son of a bitch. He planned to kill her anyway. Leo was already on his radio. "Team 2, move on the warehouse. Now. Target is alive and location confirmed." Another text appeared. "Better hope we're fast." Leo pressed something into Cheryl's hand. She looked down. It was a small pistol, compact and lethal. "Just in case," he said quietly. Cheryl stared at the gun, her hands shaking. She'd never fired a weapon in her life. In the ring, Scott landed a crushing blow to Victor's temple. Victor stumbled, clearly dazed. Then Cheryl saw it. Movement in the crowd. One of Victor's men, positioning himself at the edge of the ring. His hand moved inside his jacket, emerging with a compact rifle. He was aiming at Scott. Time seemed to slow. The neutral observers hadn't seen it yet. They were focused on the fighters. Leo was coordinating the rescue team on his radio, 3 steps away. Scott was advancing on Victor, unaware of the threat behind him, and Cheryl was holding a gun. She didn't think, didn't hesitate, didn't consider the consequences. She stood, raised the pistol with both hands the way she'd seen in movies, aimed at center mass, and fired. The sound was deafening in the warehouse. The shooter dropped, his rifle clattering to the concrete floor. The entire arena erupted. Neutral observers were on their feet. Guards moved in. Victor's men reached for weapons but were immediately surrounded by armed security. In the ring, Scott used the distraction to land a devastating uppercut that dropped Victor unconscious to the mat. The neutral arbiter blew a whistle, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Halt! Treachery has been exposed. Disqualification." Don Castellano stood at the platform's edge, his face thunderous. Victor Kozlov's organization is in violation of trial by combat rules. The match goes to Scott Elliott. Furthermore, he gestured to the downed shooter. Attempted murder of a sanctioned combatant carries severe penalties. Kozlov's claims are forfeit. Victor was being dragged from the ring, semi-conscious, blood pouring from his face. His men were being restrained by neutral security forces. The Irish and Chinese had moved in immediately to enforce the rules. Scott stood in the center of the ring, bleeding and battered, looking for only one thing: Cheryl. Their eyes met across the warehouse. She was still holding the gun, tears streaming down her face, surrounded by Leo's men. Scott vaulted over the ring barrier and crossed the distance in seconds. "Are you hurt?" His hands were on her face, checking for injuries. "I shot him," Cheryl whispered. "I actually shot him. You saved my life. I killed someone. You protected me." Scott pulled her against his chest, unmindful of the blood covering him. "You did exactly what needed to be done." Leo's radio crackled. Team 2 reporting, package secured. Target is alive and in custody. All hostiles neutralized. Cheryl's knees went weak. "Emma? Safe," Leo confirmed. "On her way here now." The aftermath was controlled chaos. EMTs treated Scott's injuries, 12 stitches for the cut above his eye, wrapped ribs, ice for the swelling. He refused to leave the warehouse until Emma arrived. She came in 30 minutes later, escorted by Leo's extraction team. Emma was shaking, traumatized, but physically unharmed. When she saw Cheryl, she broke down. "Cheryl! Oh my God, I thought I didn't know if..." The sisters crashed together, holding each other, both crying. Cheryl ran her hands over Emma's face, checking for injuries, needing physical confirmation that she was real and whole and safe. "I've got you," Cheryl whispered. "You're safe now. I promise you're safe." Scott watched from a few feet away, his expression unreadable. Leo stood beside him. "She's a natural," Leo said quietly, gesturing to where Cheryl was comforting her sister. "Took the shot without hesitation. Saved your life." "I know. You going to keep her?" Scott's response was immediate. "She was always mine to keep." When the sisters finally separated, Scott approached. Emma looked at him warily, this bloody, dangerous man who'd somehow saved her life. "Emma Taylor," Scott said formally. "I'm Scott Elliott. Your sister works for me." You did this? The fight? The rescue?" "Yes." Emma looked at Cheryl, then back at Scott. "Why?" "Because your sister is important to me, which makes you important to me." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and handed it to Emma. "Your father's debts are cleared. Officially, no one will come after you again. Additionally, your college tuition is paid through graduation, and I've arranged for a security detail to watch your apartment until you feel safe." Emma opened the envelope. Inside was a letter from a law firm confirming the debt cancellation, along with a bank statement showing a trust fund in her name. She looked up at Scott, tears in her eyes. "I don't understand. Why would you do all this?" Scott glanced at Cheryl, then back at Emma. "Because she's mine to protect. And protecting her means protecting the people she loves. Don Castellano approached, Connor and Way flanking him. The three neutral observers looked grim. Scott Elliott. Don Castellano said formally, the trial by combat has been decided in your favor. Viktor Kozlov is stripped of all territorial claims and will face consequences for violating sacred rules. His organization will be dissolved. Do you accept this verdict? I do. Furthermore, the matter of Emma Taylor's debt is resolved. She is released from all claims. Do you accept? I do. Don Castellano glanced at Cheryl, then back at Scott. Your secretary showed remarkable courage today. Saved your life in front of everyone. That's not something easily forgotten. No, Scott agreed. It's not. The Don studied him carefully. You plan to make a formal claim? I do. Connor O'Brien spoke up, his Irish accent thick. Claiming a civilian, Scott? That's a bold move. Makes her a target. She was already a target. Now she's a protected target. Wei Zhang nodded. Protection and possession. An old tradition. If you're going to do it properly. Scott turned to face the assembled crowd, dozens of criminals and enforcers who'd witnessed the entire evening. His voice carried through the warehouse. I, Scott Elliott, claim Cheryl Taylor under my protection. Not as an employee. Not as an associate. As my woman. She is mine to guard. Mine to shield. Mine to keep. Anyone who touches her answers to me. Anyone who threatens her becomes my enemy. He looked directly at the neutral observers. This claim is public and witnessed. Are there any objections? Silence. Then Don Castellano spoke. The claim is recognized. Cheryl Taylor is under the protection of Scott Elliott. So witnessed. So recorded. Scott turned to Cheryl, who was standing with her sister, looking stunned. Do you accept? He asked quietly. This was it. The moment where she could walk away, refuse the claim, maintain her independence, or she could step forward into his world permanently. Cheryl looked at Emma, who was watching with wide eyes. Then back at Scott, bloodied, battered, but standing strong. The man who'd declared war to save her sister, who'd fought in a ring for her, who'd just publicly claimed her in front of the entire underworld. She walked forward and took his hand. I accept. The warehouse erupted in applause, a primal recognition of what had just occurred. Scott pulled her close, kissed her forehead, and whispered against her hair. You're mine now, forever. I know. Okay. We need to talk about this. Scott just publicly claimed Cheryl in front of the entire criminal underworld. Is this romantic or possessive or both? And would you accept being claimed like this, or would you run for the hills? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments. And if you made it this far without subscribing, what are you even doing? Hit that button. Let's go. 3 months later, Cheryl sat at her desk outside Scott's office, reviewing his schedule for the next week. On the surface, everything looked the same. Same desk, same building, same job coordinating one of the city's most powerful criminal organizations. But everything had changed. The necklace Scott had given her the night of the fight now hung at her throat permanently, a visible symbol that she belonged to him. Her apartment had been vacated. She lived in Scott's penthouse now. The guards who watched her weren't subtle anymore. And when she walked into rooms with Scott, people nodded with respect rather than dismissal. She wasn't just the secretary anymore. She was Scott Elliott's woman. Protected. Claimed. Marked. It should have terrified her. Sometimes it did. But mostly, it felt right. Emma had stayed with them for 2 weeks after the rescue, processing trauma with a therapist Scott had arranged and paid for. She'd been scared at first of Scott, of his world, of what her sister had become part of, but she'd also seen the way he looked at Cheryl, the way he'd drop whatever he was doing to check on her, the way his men treated her with absolute respect. And gradually, Emma had relaxed. You love him, Emma had said one night while they were alone on the penthouse balcony. Yes, Cheryl had admitted. And he loves you? In his way. Emma had been quiet for a moment. His way involves a lot of violence. I know. But you're staying? Cheryl had looked through the windows to where Scott was on a phone call, his posture tense as he dealt with some business crisis. When he'd noticed her watching, his expression had softened immediately. I'm staying, she'd confirmed. Emma had hugged her. Then I trust your choice. But if he ever hurts you, I'm calling the FBI. Cheryl had laughed, knowing Emma was dead serious. Now, Emma was back at school, living in a nice apartment in a safe neighborhood with discreet security Scott had arranged. She called every other day, her trauma fading gradually as she rebuilt her sense of safety. The trust fund Scott had established would cover her tuition, living expenses, and ensure she never had to worry about money again. Emma had tried to refuse at first, but Scott had been firm. Your sister is mine to protect. That includes the people she loves. Accept the help or spend the next 4 years arguing with me about it. Emma had accepted. A knock on Cheryl's office door interrupted her thoughts. Leo stuck his head in. Boss wants to see you. Cheryl saved her work and walked into Scott's office. He was at his desk, reviewing contracts, but looked up when she entered. Close the door. She did, then approached his desk. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Come here. When she was close enough, Scott pulled her into his lap, something he'd started doing regularly now that their relationship was public. I have a meeting with the Castellano family tonight, he said. Business negotiation. It's going to run late. Okay. I'll order dinner and I want you there. Cheryl blinked. At the meeting? Yes. Don Castellano specifically requested you attend. Said he wants to meet the woman who took a shot to save my life in front of half the underworld. Scott smiled slightly. Apparently, you've developed quite a reputation. For shooting someone? For having the courage to act when it mattered. That's rare in this world. His hand came up to cup her face. You're not just my secretary anymore, Cheryl. You're my partner, my equal. People respect that. They respect you. Cheryl processed this. 3 months ago, she'd been invisible. Now crime families wanted to meet her. Are you okay with that? Scott asked, reading her expression. I don't know yet, she admitted. It's a lot. I know. And if you ever want out. I don't. The words came immediately, instinctively. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying, I chose this. I chose you. I'm not running. Scott's expression softened. He pulled her closer, pressed his forehead against hers. I love you. It was the first time he'd said it outright. The first time he'd put words to what they both knew. Cheryl's breath caught. I love you too. They stayed like that for a long moment, the outside world fading away. Then Scott's phone buzzed. Reality intruding. He checked it, sighed. Back to work. Cheryl stood, smoothing her dress. Tonight. Castellano meeting. What should I wear? Something that says I'm dangerous and beautiful and you should respect me. So, that navy suit? Scott laughed, a genuine, warm sound that made Cheryl's heart flutter. Perfect. That evening, Cheryl stood in front of the bedroom mirror, adjusting the navy suit jacket. It fit perfectly, tailored and professional. The necklace at her throat caught the light. She looked like what she'd become, a woman who'd stepped into the underworld and refused to be swallowed by it. Scott appeared behind her, dressed in a charcoal 3-piece suit. His reflection met hers in the mirror. You're beautiful, he said quietly. You're biased. Doesn't make it less true. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulled her back against his chest. Are you ready for this? No, but I'll do it anyway. That's my girl. They stood there for a moment, looking at their reflection, two people from completely different worlds who'd found each other in the darkness. Do you ever regret it? Cheryl asked quietly. The fight? Publicly claiming me? All of it? Never. Not for a second. Scott turned her to face him. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Cheryl. You make me want to be better than what I am. You're already better than you think. Only because of you. The meeting with the Castellano family went well. Don Castellano was respectful, businesslike, and made a point of acknowledging Cheryl's presence. Miss Taylor, he'd said, shaking her hand, I've heard impressive things about your courage. Not many people would have acted as decisively as you did in that warehouse. I was protecting someone I love, Cheryl had replied simply. The Don had smiled. Love makes people do extraordinary things. Scott, you've chosen well. The negotiations had proceeded smoothly after that territorial agreements, trade routes, mutual respect established. As they drove home later, Scott took Cheryl's hand. You were perfect tonight. I just answered questions. You represented us, our partnership. And you did it with grace and strength." He brought her hand to his lips. "I'm proud of you." When they arrived back at the penthouse, Cheryl found a package waiting on the entryway table. "What's this?" she asked Leo, who was reviewing security reports. "Arrived this afternoon. Already been screened and cleared." Cheryl opened it carefully. Inside was a framed photograph taken the night of the fight, showing Cheryl and Scott in the moments after his victory. Her arms around him, his face pressed against her hair. Both of them bloodied and battered but whole. Attached was a note. "To the woman who proved that courage comes in many forms. With respect, Don Castellano." Cheryl stared at the photo, tears pricking her eyes. This was her life now. Beautiful and dangerous. Protective and possessive. Violent and loving. Scott came up behind her. Looked at the photograph. "We look good together," he said quietly. "We look terrifying together." "That too." He pulled her close. "But we look happy." And they did. Despite the blood, despite the circumstances, despite everything, they looked genuinely, fiercely happy. "I love you," Cheryl said again, needing him to hear it. "I love you too, always." Later that night, Cheryl stood on the penthouse balcony, looking out at the glittering city. Emma was safe. Scott was beside her. She'd found a place in a world she'd never imagined being part of. It wasn't the life she'd planned. It wasn't safe, or simple, or easy, but it was hers, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. Scott joined her on the balcony, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How much my life has changed since I hid in your closet crying." Scott chuckled. "Best decision you ever made." "Actually." Cheryl turned in his arms, smiling up at him. "I think the best decision I made was accepting your claim." "No regrets?" "Not even one." He kissed her soft and gentle. A promise of forever in the gesture. When they finally pulled apart, Cheryl rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Scott? Yeah? Thank you. For saving Emma. For protecting me. For everything." His arms tightened around her. "You never have to thank me for protecting what's mine. That's what love is." And in that moment, standing on the balcony, with the city spread out below them, Cheryl understood something fundamental. Love in Scott's world was possessive, protective, and sometimes violent. But it was also absolute, unwavering, and fierce enough to reshape entire criminal empires. She'd become part of something bigger than herself. Something dangerous and powerful and surprisingly full of loyalty and honor. She was Scott Elliott's woman. His partner. His equal. And she'd never been more herself than she was in this moment. And that's how a secretary hiding in a closet became a mafia queen. If you made it all the way through this emotional roller coaster and you're still not subscribed, I'm judging you so hard right now. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a comment telling me what you thought of Cheryl's transformation. Should we do more mafia romance stories? Let me know. Also, fun fact. According to my research, claiming ceremonies in organized crime are actually a real thing, though obviously not this dramatic. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video, and until then, may all your closet crying sessions lead to billionaire mafia bosses declaring war for you. Bye.